So I wanted to come on today and talk about five potentially unpopular takes on retro gaming, things that have just popped into my mind over the course of a month, and I finally had some time to sit down and record those ideas. My first possibly unpopular take is that I don't understand the purpose of the retro gaming convention. Now, I haven't been to one recently, especially since things have opened up after COVID. But a few years prior to COVID, I went to the Too Many Games convention outside of Philadelphia. And while it was interesting to a degree to see that many retro gamers in one very large space, I just fail to see the appeal. You're paying a very large ticket fee, cover charge, whatever you want to call it, to get into an event that essentially charges you eBay prices or better for purchases without all of the eBay protection. So I didn't understand, if I'm going to pay $300, $400, $500 for a game, and there was certainly a lot of interesting stuff out there on the convention floor. Why would I pay those prices when I could just order it on eBay? And I'm not necessarily a fan of, everything has to be purchased through eBay. I kind of like the hunt on garage sales and estate sales and things like that. And I do want to support my local retro gaming stores if they have something that I'm interested in. But it just seemed puzzling that people would actually spend lots of money for vendors who fly in, sell things, and who knows if they will refund you those purchases. Maybe things have changed. Maybe, they would if there was something wrong, say, with a piece of hardware you purchased. But it seemed a bit counterintuitive as a shopping experience. And then, of course, you did have the panels and things like that, the meet and greets with YouTube stars. And for me, that's really not something that I'm interested in. I have interacted with members of the community in various settings, and I think I don't need a convention to do that. Now, the next retro gaming idea that I have somewhat of a problem with is this purity of retro hardware, this idea that the original hardware is the best experience. I think in some cases that's true. I mean, I think that as someone, say, who grew up with the NES, SNES, sitting down and playing those consoles on, say, a CRT is a unique and nostalgic experience, but I question the degree to which it is really the best experience. I think now so many different methodologies of playing retro games are out on the marketplace. You think of things like, high end analog NT type of solutions. I am a fan of emulation of RetroArch, and for me, those options are equally good and reasonably nostalgic. No, it's not like having the rectangular NES controller in my hand with the requisite hand pain that comes from that, but playing it on those other devices with modern controllers is not a terrible experience, especially if you're saving a little bit of money in the process in the case of emulation or even a compilation on a modern system. These are all, I think, pretty good options. So as the original hardware dies, it to me seems an expensive proposition to constantly repair and upgrade and things like that. And certainly for the people who do it, that's awesome. But I think for the average person who is into retro gaming, I think there are so many different ways to play and so many different new hardware options and also quality of life options that come along with that new hardware, whether it's something physical like the analog or whether you're using a RetroArch and having save states and all of the conveniences that go along with a modern piece of software. That to me enhances the experience. It's not somewhat impure. It is inauthentic to what we did back in the day, but I think it's a natural evolution that still preserves a good bit of the nostalgia. Now, a related point is that physical media is always better. And as someone who has been doing retro collecting for upwards of 15 years now, consciously and unconsciously as a kid, sort of going through the different eras and not really selling off any games, I am heavily invested in physical media. But again, I don't think that the physicality of the media is alone what the appeal is. I actually think that certainly now, as we move into this era of gaming as services and online games and online storefronts and things like that, physical media, what it offers is autonomy over your gaming experience. And I think that's the appeal. Physical media, in and of itself, is, I'm not going to say nothing special. It is special. Again, it does convey a sense of nostalgia. But I think the true appeal is the fact that I have a closet filled with video games from all different eras, and I can play it on my own time frame whenever I want, however I want, and I don't have to deal with somebody who's locked down that code behind a paywall or kind of other incentive system. I can sit down and play an NES game or play a Sega Saturn game, and it's mine, and I have complete unfettered access to that. But emulators do that as well. Game hacks or, cracked keys do that as well. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way to go. I'd always prefer to pay for the software, but if you have a collection like that, why not digitize it? Why not play the games in a way that maintains that autonomy and your agency over how you play games? So I think physical media is perhaps the best example, but again, there are other ways to do that, and even I think a well-priced subscription service or Steam or something like that, that at least for Steam up to this point, they have a lot of retro-inspired titles, and they do give you a good bit of autonomy over them. So, to me, physical media is important, but it's not in and of itself superior. Now, I might catch some flack for this opinion, but I've never been a fan of boss battles. And as I get older, I find that boss battles often interrupt the fun that I'm having with a game rather than enhance it. I understand why they existed, say, in the 8-bit, 16-bit era. They were a way to pace a game. They were a way to develop a simple kind of narrative to a game. And of course, they were tests of skill and challenges that the player had to overcome. You'd feel good after beating a particularly difficult boss, figuring out a pattern. But I think now they're somewhat superfluous to the pleasures that gaming offers. So let's take a modern example, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. An absolutely wonderful game, beautifully built, levels and challenge stages with so many different aspects and places to discover. And it, to me, while the game is, of course, on the easy side, like many Kirby games, just playing through it and experiencing those new levels as they roll out in the different areas, that's the pleasure of the game. That's the compelling gameplay loop. The boss battles are just kind of interrupt that. Again, they're not particularly difficult in that game. In fact, a lot of the patterns are pretty standard. I haven't beaten it yet, but I would say 70% of the way through. So, I just don't know why they need to be there. And I think the same could be said for a lot of modern platforming games, adventure games, at least. Now, I've always respected Halo for doing something different. I haven't played through every Halo game, but it seems like Halo's approach has been not so much to create boss characters, although they are there, certainly, but to develop, these high-powered characters and have you square off against them in different tactical scenarios. So it's not necessarily one huge boss much of the time. It's more of a, okay, you're going to fight these very, very difficult characters in this situation. How do you adapt to that? I think that's that's the more interesting way to go about a quote-unquote boss battle. And in the new Halo, which sadly I've not had time to really get through, but it seems like the boss fight is now more of a bounty. Like, okay, this particular guy is entrenched in this area of the map. Can you take him out? And even if you fail at that, you're like, okay, maybe I need this new weapon. Maybe I'll approach it from a different part of the map. Again, more interesting than kind of the set piece boss battle, which I wouldn't argue needs to go away completely, but I wonder if we've now reached a point where it doesn't have to play such a central role in video game development. And a related point, retro difficulty is always better. I think there's a kind of gatekeeping that goes on now that says, well, if you grew up in the 8 and 16-bit era, you're a more skillful player because you played games that didn't hold your hand. You played games that were brutally hard, and you got through it. Now, again, I wouldn't detract from that. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad mindset. Video games, for so much of their history, were always a test of skill and dexterity and strategizing. And I think that is a very worthy way to play a video game. I don't want that to go away. But I think, again, now we've reached a point where a video game, whether modern or a retro-inspired video game, should really support all types of play styles. I find myself now at a point in my life where I literally don't have the time to repeat things over and over and over again to master or perfect a certain game. I want to go through it. I want to enjoy it. I don't want it to be a cakewalk because that's kind of boring and a waste of time. But I also don't want it to be so brutally difficult that I need to engage in kind of that old school rinse and repeat, pattern memorization, absolute perfection mindset to get through a game. If I have an hour to play a game, I want to see as much of that game as possible in that hour. Again, take another modern example, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge game. That's an absolutely marvelous game. Some people were criticizing it because you can kind of refill your super gauge at will, which makes the game very easy. You can just wait until you clear a particular screen, power up, move on. But I would say it doesn't force you to use that ability, and I actually didn't realize it until about halfway through the game. You can have that. You should be able to turn that on, turn that off. You should be able to craft your play session the way you want to play it. Do you want the brutal, old school, hardcore difficulty? Wonderful. Go with it. Do you want just kind of a chill, relaxed experience? Go for it. And of course, I believe that the cheat code should come back, that you should be able to adjust the parameters of play as you feel like. And again, based on your situation. So I think one of the coolest things that I saw in a game in sort of recent times, although this is probably 5-6 years ago now, is Bravely Default, where you could actually manipulate the encounter rate so that you could, really grind and level up and get more powerful, or you could just drop it down and go through the story. Things like that, I think, respect the adult player, and I'm not even going to say the adult player, that respect all players when you're paying a high price for a video game. Nothing in the game should be walled off. I shouldn't be forced to play it in a particular way. I should be able to play it the way I want to play it at the pace that suits the time that I have to invest in it. So, again, don't want retro difficulty to go away, but I hope that difficulty can be addressed in kind of a more nuanced and reflective way in modern takes on retro games and really in all games moving forward. So those are my 5 potentially unpopular takes. Let me know what you think in the comments.